Detective Lisa Chen had been driving for 3 hours straight. The long journey from Washington, D.C. to her hometown of Millbrook was finally coming to an end. She glanced at the dashboard clock, 2:30 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon. Perfect timing to visit her mother before the evening rush hour began. The quiet suburban streets of Millbrook looked exactly the same as they had 15 years ago when Lisa first left for college. Tree-lined roads with perfectly manicured lawns, expensive cars parked in driveways, and that familiar sense of peace that only small, wealthy communities seem to possess. Lisa smiled as she recognized the old bakery where she used to buy cookies as a child, now renovated but still standing proud on the corner of Main Street. Her black sedan purred quietly as she navigated the familiar turns toward her childhood home. Lisa had worked hard to afford this car, a symbol of how far she'd come from the young girl who once walked these same streets wondering if she'd ever make something of herself. Now, at 38, she was one of the FBI's most respected agents, specializing in civil rights cases that often took her to places where justice seemed like a foreign concept. As she turned onto Maple Avenue, Lisa noticed something in her rearview mirror. A police car had been following her for the past few blocks, maintaining a steady distance but clearly keeping pace with her movements. She wasn't speeding. Her cruise control was set exactly at the speed limit. Her registration was current, her inspection sticker valid, and she hadn't violated any traffic laws. Still, Lisa felt that familiar knot in her stomach that came from years of knowing how these situations could unfold. She'd investigated too many cases where routine traffic stops had gone terribly wrong. The difference was, this time she was on the receiving end. The police car's lights suddenly flashed on, painting the quiet neighborhood in alternating red and blue. Lisa sighed and pulled over to the curb, making sure to stop in a well-lit area where any passersby could clearly see what was happening. She turned off the engine, placed her hands on the steering wheel where they would be visible, and waited. Officer Kevin Mitchell stepped out of his patrol car with the confidence of someone who had done this routine hundreds of times before. At 42, Mitchell had been with the Millbrook Police Department for 18 years, and in his mind he could spot trouble from a mile away. Today, trouble looked like an expensive car being driven by someone who clearly didn't belong in this neighborhood. Mitchell approached the driver's side window, his hand resting casually near his service weapon, a habit he'd developed over years of traffic stops. Through the tinted window he could see the outline of a woman, but something about the situation felt off to him. Expensive cars in this neighborhood usually belonged to residents he knew, and he didn't recognize this vehicle. Lisa rolled down, her window completely, keeping her hands visible and her voice calm and professional. "Good afternoon, officer. Is there a problem?" Mitchell studied her face for a moment, his expression hardening almost immediately. "License and registration," he said curtly, without answering her question or explaining why he had pulled her over. "Of course," Lisa replied, moving slowly and deliberately. "I'm going to reach for my purse now to get my identification." She had learned long ago that clear communication during traffic stops could prevent misunderstandings that might escalate into dangerous situations. As Lisa retrieved her wallet, Mitchell stepped back slightly, his posture becoming more defensive. When she handed him her driver's license, he barely glanced at it before asking, "What are you doing in this neighborhood?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Lisa had heard variations of it countless times in her professional capacity, usually from the mouths of officers who would later find themselves under federal investigation. She chose her words carefully. "I'm visiting my mother," Lisa replied evenly. "She lives on Oak Street, just a few blocks from here." Mitchell's eyes narrowed. "Oak Street? That's a pretty expensive area. What kind of work do you do?" Lisa felt the conversation moving into territory that had nothing to do with traffic violations and everything to do with Mitchell's assumptions about who belonged in Millbrook's wealthy neighborhoods. She made a decision that would change the course of the next hour dramatically. "I'm a federal agent with the FBI," Lisa said, reaching slowly for her credentials. "I'm going to show you my badge and identification." The leather wallet containing Lisa's FBI credentials felt familiar in her hands. She'd presented these same credentials hundreds of times, usually when identifying herself to local law enforcement who were grateful for federal assistance on difficult cases. The gold badge and official identification had opened doors, commanded respect, and established her authority in countless situations. But as she held her credentials toward Officer Mitchell, something in his expression told her this time would be different. Mitchell took the wallet and examined it with the kind of exaggerated scrutiny usually reserved for obviously fake documents. He turned the badge over in his hands, held it up to the light, and even bent the leather to test its flexibility. After nearly 2 minutes of theatrical inspection, he handed it back with a dismissive laugh. "This is fake," Mitchell declared, his voice loud enough that a woman walking her dog across the street turned to look. "Where did you get this? Online? Some costume shop?" Lisa felt her heart rate increase, but her voice remained steady. "Officer, that badge is genuine. I'm Special Agent Lisa Chen with the FBI Civil Rights Division. You can call the Washington, D.C. field office to verify my credentials if you have any doubts." Mitchell's laugh became more pronounced. "Right. And I'm the President of the United States." He leaned closer to the window, his voice taking on a mocking tone. "Lady, I've been a cop for 18 years. You think I can't spot a fake badge when I see one? You think some random person driving through our neighborhood is really an FBI agent?" The "our neighborhood" comment wasn't lost on Lisa. She'd heard that possessive language before, usually from officers who saw themselves as guardians of particular communities, deciding who belonged and who didn't, based on criteria that had nothing to do with law enforcement and everything to do with prejudice. "Officer Mitchell," Lisa said, reading his name tag. "I understand this might seem unusual, but I assure you my credentials are authentic. I can provide you with contact information for my supervisor, or you can run my name through federal databases." Mitchell straightened up and took a step back from the car, his hand moving toward his radio. "Step out of the vehicle," he ordered. Lisa felt the situation shifting into dangerous territory. She'd investigated dozens of cases that started exactly like this. Minor traffic stops that escalated because officers let their assumptions override their training and common sense. The irony that she might become the subject of the very type of incident she'd spent her career investigating wasn't lost on her. "Officer, is there a specific traffic violation you're citing me for?" Lisa asked, still hoping to de-escalate the situation through professional dialogue. "I said get out of the car," Mitchell repeated, his voice rising. "Now." As Lisa slowly opened her car door, she noticed that Mitchell's hand had moved to rest on his service weapon. The gesture sent a clear message. This was no longer a routine traffic stop, if it ever had been. She stepped out of the vehicle with her hands partially raised, her federal credentials still visible in her left hand. "I'm complying with your instructions," Lisa said calmly. "But I want to make it clear that I am a federal law enforcement officer, and these credentials are genuine." Mitchell circled around to face her directly, his eyes scanning her from head to toe in a way that made Lisa deeply uncomfortable. "Federal agent?" he repeated mockingly. "In a car like this, wearing clothes like that, in a neighborhood like this. Do you really expect me to believe that story?" The dismissive tone in Mitchell's voice made it clear that his skepticism had nothing to do with the validity of Lisa's credentials and everything to do with his preconceived notions about what an FBI agent should look like. Lisa had encountered this attitude before, but never while she was the one being questioned. A small crowd was beginning to gather across the street. Mrs. Henderson, who lived in the house with the rose garden, had come out to water her plants, but was clearly more interested in the drama unfolding on the curb. 2 teenagers on bicycles had stopped pretending to be interested in something else and were openly watching the scene develop. Mitchell seemed to feed off the attention, his voice becoming louder and more theatrical. "You know what I think?" he said, addressing not just Lisa but seemingly the growing audience. "I think you bought this fake badge online and you're using it to try to get out of legitimate police work. I think you're exactly the kind of person who gives law enforcement a bad name." Lisa felt a flash of anger but forced herself to remain calm. Getting emotional would only make the situation worse, and she knew that every word and action was likely being recorded by at least one of the phones she could see being held by the gathering witnesses. "Officer Mitchell, I respect the difficult job you do every day," Lisa said, choosing her words with the precision of someone who understood that this conversation might eventually be played in a courtroom. "But I'm asking you to take a moment to verify my credentials before this." The backup sirens grew louder as Officer Mitchell paced back and forth in front of Lisa, his agitation increasing with each passing minute. What had started as a simple traffic stop had transformed into something much more serious in his mind, and he seemed determined to prove that his initial instincts had been correct. Lisa remained standing next to her car, her hands visible and her posture non-threatening, but she could feel the weight of every person who had stopped to watch the scene unfold. The crowd had grown from a few curious neighbors to nearly a dozen people, including several who were clearly recording everything on their phones. "Put your hands behind your back," Mitchell ordered suddenly, pulling handcuffs from his belt. Lisa felt her heart skip a beat. "Officer Mitchell, I haven't committed any crime. I've shown you my federal credentials, I've answered all your questions, and I've complied with every instruction you've given me." "Those credentials are fake," Mitchell said for what felt like the 10th time. "And now you're under arrest for impersonating a federal officer, which is a felony in case you didn't know." The crowd across the street had grown silent, sensing that something was seriously wrong with what they were witnessing. Mrs. Henderson had stopped pretending to water her plants and was openly staring. The two teenagers on bicycles had been joined by their friends, creating a small audience of young people who were documenting everything on their phones. Lisa knew she was at a critical decision point. She could continue to comply and hope that Mitchell's backup would include someone with more sense and better judgment, or she could assert her federal authority more forcefully. Both options carried risks, but allowing herself to be arrested on false charges seemed like the worst choice. "Officer, before you take any further action, I strongly recommend that you contact your supervisor," Lisa said, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being taken seriously. "I am Special Agent Lisa Chen, badge number 2847, assigned to the Civil Rights Division of the FBI. Arresting a federal agent without cause is a career-ending mistake." Mitchell's face flushed red with anger. "Are you threatening me?" he demanded, stepping closer to Lisa. "Because that sounds like a threat to me." "I'm not threatening anyone," Lisa replied calmly. "I'm trying to prevent a situation that will end badly for everyone involved. Please just take 5 minutes to verify my identity before you do something you'll regret." But Mitchell seemed to have passed the point where reason could reach him. The combination of his initial embarrassment at having his authority questioned, the presence of witnesses recording his every move, and what appeared to be a deep-seated belief that Lisa simply couldn't be who she claimed to be, had pushed him beyond rational thinking. "Turn around and put your hands behind your back now," Mitchell shouted, loud enough that people in houses 3 blocks away could probably hear him. Lisa had investigated enough cases to know that this was the moment where traffic stops often went from bad to catastrophic. She'd read reports where suspects had been shot for reaching for their wallets, for making sudden movements, for any action that could be interpreted as threatening by an already agitated officer. As she slowly turned around, Lisa caught sight of a woman across the street, who was frantically talking on her phone. The woman looked familiar. She might have been one of Lisa's mother's neighbors, someone who had known Lisa when she was growing up in this same neighborhood. The cold metal of the handcuffs clicked around Lisa's wrists, and she felt a surge of humiliation unlike anything she'd experienced in her professional life. Here she was, a federal agent with 15 years of distinguished service, being arrested in her hometown on charges that anyone with access to a computer could disprove in less than 2 minutes. "This is a mistake that's going to have serious consequences," Lisa said as Mitchell guided her toward his patrol car. "I'm asking you one more time to contact your supervisor before you put me in that car." Mitchell's response was to grip her arm tighter and push her forward more forcefully. "The only mistake here is you thinking you could fool a real cop with a fake badge," he said. "I've seen plenty of people like you who think they can talk their way out of anything." The phrase "people like you" hung in the air with all its implied meaning. Lisa had heard those same words in dozens of depositions and court transcripts, usually spoken by officers who were trying to explain why they had treated certain individuals differently than others. As they approached Mitchell's patrol car, the backup units finally arrived. 2 additional police cars pulled up, their occupants quickly assessing the scene before approaching. Lisa felt a brief moment of hope that cooler heads might prevail, but that hope dimmed when she saw the expressions on the arriving officers' faces. Officer Rodriguez stepped out of the first backup unit, a veteran cop in his 50s who carried himself with the confidence of someone who had seen everything the job had to offer. He approached Mitchell with a questioning look. "What do we have here, Kevin?" Rodriguez asked, glancing at Lisa and then at the crowd of witnesses who were still recording everything. "Female suspect attempting to impersonate a federal officer," Mitchell replied, his voice full of self-importance. "She's got a fake FBI badge and everything. Pretty elaborate setup, but not good enough to fool an experienced officer." Rodriguez looked at Lisa more carefully, taking in her professional appearance, her calm demeanor despite being handcuffed, and the expensive car she'd been driving. Something about the situation didn't sit right with him, but he also knew that questioning a fellow officer in front of witnesses could create its own problems. "Did you run her name through the system?" Rodriguez asked quietly. Mitchell hesitated, for just a moment too long. "I was about to when she started getting belligerent and threatening me," he said. "That's when I decided to take her into custody for everyone's safety." Lisa spoke up, her voice carrying across the street to the watching crowd. "I never threatened anyone. I simply asked Officer Mitchell to verify my credentials, which are completely genuine. I am Special Agent Lisa Chen with the FBI, and this arrest is happening without probable cause." The third officer, a young woman who looked like she might be new to the force, approached the group with obvious uncertainty. Officer Williams had been on the job for less than 2 years, but she'd had enough training to recognize when a situation didn't feel right. "Maybe we should run her name before we transport her," Williams suggested quietly to Rodriguez. "It would only take a minute to check the federal database." Mitchell's reaction was immediate and hostile. "Are you questioning my judgment, Williams? I've been doing this job since before you were in high school. I know a fake badge when I see one, and I know when someone is running a con." The tension between the officers was becoming obvious even to the crowd of witnesses. Lisa could see people whispering to each other, pointing at the officers and continuing to record everything on their phones. Rodriguez found himself in an uncomfortable position. On one hand, Mitchell was a senior officer with years of experience. On the other hand, the woman in handcuffs didn't fit the profile of someone who would attempt to impersonate a federal agent, and the situation was being recorded by numerous witnesses. "Let's just run her name quickly," Rodriguez said, trying to sound casual about it. Standard procedure, nothing more. But Mitchell had dug in too deep to back down now. "She's going in the car and we're taking her to the station where she can explain to a judge why she thought impersonating a federal officer was a good idea." Lisa felt the situation spiraling completely out of control. She'd handled hundreds of tense situations in her career, but always from the position of authority. Being handcuffed and dismissed while trying to maintain her dignity and professionalism was unlike anything she'd ever experienced. As Mitchell opened the door to his patrol car and prepared to place Lisa inside, a new voice cut through the tension. From across the street, "Lisa? Lisa Chen? Is that you?" Everyone turned to see an elderly woman hurrying across the street as quickly as her age would allow. Mrs. Patterson had been Lisa's next-door neighbor for the first 18 years of her life and had watched her grow up from a shy elementary school student to a confident young woman heading off to college. "Mrs. Patterson, yes, it's me," Lisa called out, her voice betraying relief at seeing a familiar face. The elderly woman reached the group of officers, slightly out of breath but clearly determined to speak her mind. "Officers, there must be some mistake here. This is Lisa Chen. I've known her since she was 7 years old. Her mother lives right here in the neighborhood on Oak Street. Lisa works for the FBI in Washington, D.C. Mitchell's face showed a flash of uncertainty for the first time since the traffic stop began. The arrival of someone who could personally vouch for Lisa's identity complicated his narrative considerably. "Ma'am, I appreciate your concern," Mitchell said, trying to regain control of the situation. But this woman was driving through the neighborhood with fake federal credentials. I can't let personal relationships interfere with law enforcement. Mrs. Patterson looked at Mitchell with the kind of stern expression that had intimidated 3 generations of neighborhood children. Young man, I may be old, but I'm not stupid. Lisa Chen has been an FBI agent for 15 years. I have newspaper clippings about her. 25 miles away in Washington, D.C., FBI agent David Martinez was having what he thought would be a routine Tuesday afternoon. His partner Lisa Chen had taken a personal day to visit her mother, which left David catching up on paperwork and reviewing case files in their shared office on the 5th floor of the J. Edgar Hoover building. David and Lisa had been partners for 6 years, working some of the Bureau's most sensitive civil rights cases. They had developed the kind of professional trust that only comes from facing dangerous situations together and knowing that your partner always has your back. When Lisa was late for their scheduled check-in call at 3 p.m., David felt the first, small stirring of concern. By 3:30, when Lisa still hadn't responded to his text messages, David's concern deepened into worry. Lisa was never late for check-ins, especially when she was traveling outside the Washington area. It was one of their unbreakable rules. Always stay in contact. Always let your partner know where you are and when you expect to be back. David tried calling Lisa's cell phone, but it went straight to voicemail. He left a message asking her to call him back as soon as possible, then sat back in his chair to think through the possibilities. Lisa might have lost cell service, her phone, battery might have died, or she might simply be caught up in family matters and lost track of time. All perfectly reasonable explanations that did nothing to ease the growing knot in David's stomach. At 4 p.m., David decided to take action. He accessed the FBI's vehicle tracking system and pulled up the GPS location for Lisa's bureau car. What he saw on his computer screen made him sit up straight in his chair. Lisa's car was stationary in Millbrook, surrounded by what appeared to be several police vehicles. David had been an FBI agent for 12 years, long enough to know that when a federal agent's car shows up surrounded by local police units, it usually means one of 2 things. Either the agent is providing assistance to local law enforcement, or something has gone seriously wrong. He grabbed his phone and dialed the Millbrook Police Department's main number, identifying himself as Lisa's partner and asking to speak with whoever was in charge at the scene on Maple Avenue. The desk sergeant, who answered the phone, seemed confused by David's call. FBI agent. We don't have any FBI agents involved in current operations, sir. Are you sure you have the right location? David felt his blood pressure rising. I'm looking at GPS tracking that shows my partner's bureau vehicle surrounded by your units at the corner of Maple and 3rd. What's the nature of that call? There was a long pause on the other end of the line, followed by the sound of papers shuffling and keyboard typing. Sir, let me transfer you to Sergeant Murphy. He's our watch commander today. Sergeant Murphy came on the line, sounding harried and slightly annoyed. This is Murphy. What can I do for you, Agent? Martinez, FBI. I need to know why my partner's car is surrounded by your units, and I need to know right now. Murphy's tone changed immediately when he realized he was talking to a federal agent. Sir, let me pull up the incident report. Okay. I see we have units responding to a traffic stop that escalated. Officer Mitchell called for backup regarding a suspect attempting to impersonate a federal officer. David felt the world tilt sideways. Sergeant, my partner is Special Agent Lisa Chen, badge number 2847, assigned to the Civil Rights Division. She is definitely not impersonating anyone. She is a federal officer. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for what felt like an eternity. When Murphy finally spoke, his voice had taken on the careful tone of someone who suddenly realizes they might be dealing with a situation much more serious than initially reported. Agent Martinez, can you hold, please? I need to make some calls. Immediately. David was not in a mood to hold. Sergeant, if one of your officers has arrested my partner because he doesn't believe she's a federal agent, we have a major problem that needs to be resolved right now. I'm going to need the name of your police chief, and I'm going to need it immediately. Sir, Chief Williams is in a meeting, but I can... Get him out of the meeting, David interrupted, his voice carrying the authority of someone who was done being polite. Get him on the phone now, or I'll be calling the FBI director's office. to explain why a federal agent was arrested by local police who couldn't be bothered to verify her credentials. Murphy clearly recognized the seriousness of David's tone. "Yes, sir. Please hold for just one moment." While David waited for the police chief, he was already mentally preparing for what was likely to be a very difficult conversation. Lisa was one of the Bureau's most professional agents, someone who had never had so much as a complaint filed against her in 15 years of service. If she had been arrested by local police, it meant someone had made a catastrophically bad decision. Chief Williams came on the line sounding like someone who had just been dragged out of an important meeting to deal with a crisis he knew nothing about. "This is Chief Williams. I understand there may be some confusion about one of our traffic stops." David took a deep breath and tried to keep his voice professional. "Chief Williams, this is FBI Special Agent David Martinez. Your Officer Mitchell has apparently arrested my partner, Special Agent Lisa Chen, because he believes her federal credentials are fake. I can assure you they are not fake, and I can provide verification through multiple federal databases within minutes." There was a long pause, followed by what sounded like Chief Williams covering the phone and having a muffled conversation with someone else in his office. When he came back on the line, his voice carried a new urgency. "Agent Martinez, I'm going to need you to hold while I contact the scene directly. If what you're telling me is accurate, we have a serious situation that needs to be resolved immediately. Chief, with all due respect, there's no if about this. Lisa Chen is a federal agent. She has been for 15 years, and she was traveling to visit her mother in your town. Whatever your officer thinks he saw, he was wrong." Chief Williams was already reaching for his radio as he spoke. "I understand, Agent Martinez. I'm contacting the scene right now to get this sorted out. Can I call you back at this number in 10 minutes? David wanted to say no, wanted to demand that he be patched through to the scene directly, wanted to jump in his car and drive to Millbrook himself. But he also knew that giving the chief a few minutes to handle the situation might be the fastest way to get Lisa released and avoid turning this into an interagency incident. 10 minutes, David agreed. "And Chief, my partner better be released and unharmed, or this becomes a federal civil rights investigation by the end of the day." Back in Millbrook, Chief Williams was frantically trying to reach Officer Mitchell on the radio. When Mitchell finally responded, his voice carried the defensive tone of someone who knew he was about to be second-guessed. "Unit 47, this is Chief Williams. I need a status update on your current situation immediately." Mitchell looked around at the crowd of witnesses, the other officers, and Lisa still standing in handcuffs next to his patrol car. "Chief, I have a suspect in custody for impersonating a federal officer. Situation is under control." "Officer Mitchell, I need you to listen to me very carefully," Chief Williams said, his voice carrying the kind of authority that made every officer on the scene stop what they were doing. "I just received a call from the FBI in Washington, D.C. The woman you have in custody may actually be a federal agent." Mitchell felt his stomach drop, but his response was immediate and defensive. "Chief, I examined her credentials personally. The badge is clearly fake. I've been doing this job long enough to know the difference. Mitchell, the FBI agent I just spoke with, provided badge number 2847 for Special Agent Lisa Chen. Can you confirm whether that matches the credentials the suspect showed you?" Mitchell looked at Lisa, then at the crowd of witnesses who were hanging on every word of the radio conversation. He realized that he had never actually looked at the badge number on Lisa's credentials. He had dismissed them as fake based on his assumption that she couldn't possibly be who she claimed to be. The badge appeared to be counterfeit based on my experience, Chief." Chief Williams closed his eyes and rubbed his temples, recognizing the tone of an officer who was starting to realize he had made a serious mistake. "Mitchell, I need you to remove the handcuffs from the suspect immediately and treat her as you would any federal law enforcement officer. This is a direct order." "But Chief—" "No buts, Officer Mitchell. Remove the handcuffs now. Apologize to the agent and wait for me to arrive on scene. I'll be there in 5 minutes." The radio conversation had been heard not only by the officers on scene, but also by many of the witnesses who were standing close enough to overhear. A murmur went through the crowd as people began to realize that they had just witnessed a serious mistake by local law enforcement. Officer Rodriguez stepped forward, clearly relieved to have direction from a higher authority. "Kevin, you heard. The chief. Let's get those cuffs off her." Mitchell's hands shook slightly as he reached for his handcuff keys. The confidence and authority he had displayed throughout the incident were evaporating rapidly, replaced by the dawning realization that he had just arrested a federal agent based on nothing more than his own prejudices and assumptions. As the handcuffs came off, Lisa rubbed her wrists and turned to face Mitchell directly. Chief Williams arrived on scene with the urgency of someone who understood that his department was facing a potential disaster. As his patrol car pulled up to the crowded intersection, he could see the scope of what had unfolded. Multiple police, vehicles, a crowd of at least 30 witnesses, many of whom were recording everything on their phones, and in the center of it all, a professionally dressed woman who was clearly not the typical subject of a traffic stop gone wrong. Lisa watched. The chief exit his vehicle and immediately begin assessing the situation with the experienced eye of a veteran law enforcement officer. Chief Williams was in his late 50s with gray hair and the kind of measured demeanor that suggested he had dealt with crisis situations before. But even from a distance, Lisa could see the concern in his expression as he took in the scene. "Officer." Mitchell stood off to one side, no longer the confident authority figure he had been just minutes earlier. The arrival of his chief, combined with the growing realization that he had made a catastrophic error in judgment, had transformed him into someone who looked like he wanted to disappear into the pavement. Chief Williams approached Lisa directly, extending his hand in a gesture of professional respect. "Agent Chen, I'm Chief Williams. I want to personally apologize for what you've experienced here today. This should never have happened." Lisa shook the chief's hand, noting that his apology seemed genuine, but also understanding that apologies alone wouldn't undo what had occurred. "Chief Williams, I appreciate your response, but we need to discuss what happened here and why your officer felt justified in arresting a federal agent without conducting even basic verification of my credentials." The chief nodded grimly. "Absolutely. I've already been in contact with your partner, Agent Martinez, and I understand the seriousness of this situation. Would you be willing to step aside so we can discuss this matter privately?" Before Lisa could respond, her phone finally began ringing. She glanced at the caller ID and saw David's name. "Excuse me, Chief. This is my partner calling." "Lisa?" David's voice carried a mixture of relief and anger. "Are you okay? What the hell happened out there?" "I'm fine, David. The situation has been resolved. I'm speaking with Chief Williams now." "Put me on speaker," David requested. "I want to hear what the chief has to say about how one of his officers arrested a federal agent." Lisa activated the speaker function, and David's voice carried clearly to Chief Williams and the officers still standing nearby. "Chief Williams, this is Agent Martinez. I want you to understand that what happened to my partner today is going to have serious consequences. We're not just talking about a simple misunderstanding here." Chief Williams took a deep breath before responding. "Agent Martinez, you're absolutely right. Officer Mitchell acted inappropriately, and I take full responsibility for my department's actions. We're going to conduct a full investigation and take appropriate disciplinary action." "Chief," David continued, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had dealt with similar situations before, "you need to understand that this incident involves potential violations of federal civil rights law. An FBI agent was arrested without probable cause, based apparently on nothing more than your officer's assumption that she couldn't be who she claimed to be." The weight of David's words was not lost on anyone within earshot. Several of the watching officers exchanged glances, clearly understanding that they were witnessing something that could have career-ending implications for everyone involved. Lisa took back control of the conversation. "David, Chief Williams has apologized and promised an investigation. But we both know that this goes beyond just departmental discipline. Officer Mitchell violated my civil rights under color of law, which is a federal crime." Officer Rodriguez, who had been standing quietly nearby, stepped forward with obvious reluctance. "Chief, I wanted on record that I suggested we run Agent Chen's name through the federal database. Officer Mitchell refused to do so and insisted on proceeding with the arrest." Chief Williams turned to look at Rodriguez with an expression that mixed appreciation for his honesty with frustration at the situation. Thank you for that information, Rodriguez. I'll need a full written report from you about everything that occurred here today. Officer Williams, the youngest officer on scene, also stepped forward. Chief, I also suggested verifying Agent Chen's credentials. I want that included in my report as well. The solidarity among the other officers in distancing themselves from Mitchell's actions was becoming increasingly obvious. Mitchell stood alone, isolated not just by his poor judgment, but by his refusal to listen to his colleagues' suggestions for handling the situation more appropriately. Chief Williams turned, his attention back to Lisa. Agent Chen, in addition to a full departmental investigation, I want to offer you whatever cooperation you need for any federal investigation that may result from this incident. My department will be completely transparent. Lisa appreciated the chief's offer, but she also knew that the damage had already been done. The incident had been recorded by multiple witnesses, would undoubtedly be shared on social media, and would likely become a case study in how not to handle interactions with federal law enforcement. Chief, I need to ask you directly, has your department received complaints about Officer Mitchell's conduct before today? Lisa's question carried the weight of her professional experience investigating similar cases. Chief Williams hesitated before answering, clearly weighing how much information to reveal. Agent Chen, I think that's a conversation we should have in private, perhaps back at headquarters. The chief's hesitation told Lisa everything she needed to know. Mitchell likely had a history of problematic behavior, and the department had either ignored it or failed to address it adequately. This traffic stop wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a pattern. David's voice came through the phone speaker again. Lisa, I've already contacted Supervisor Morrison and briefed him on the situation. He wants you to return to DC immediately so we can begin documenting everything that happened. Lisa looked around at the crowd of witnesses, many of whom were still recording the conversation. She realized that this incident would likely become public regardless of how the official investigation proceeded. The age of social media meant that police misconduct could no longer be quietly swept under the rug. David, I'll head back as soon as I finish here. But first, I want to get contact information for the witnesses who intervened on my behalf. Lisa looked directly at Mrs. Patterson, who had been brave enough to confront the officers and vouch for Lisa's identity. Mrs. Patterson stepped forward eagerly. Of course, dear, and I want you to know that several of us recorded everything that happened. If you need those recordings for your investigation, we'll be happy to provide them. The offer of witness testimony and video evidence seemed to make Officer Mitchell even more uncomfortable. He had been standing silently throughout most of the conversation with Chief Williams, but now he stepped forward with obvious reluctance. Agent Chen, Mitchell said, his voice barely above a whisper. I want to apologize. I made a mistake. Lisa looked at Mitchell for a long moment before responding. Throughout her career, she had seen many officers offer apologies when they realized their actions might have consequences. The sincerity of those apologies usually became clear during the investigation process. Officer Mitchell, what happened here today wasn't just a mistake. You saw my federal credentials. You heard my explanation. You had multiple opportunities to verify my identity, and you chose not to. Instead, you escalated the situation, arrested me without probable cause, and treated me in a way that had nothing to do with law enforcement and everything to do with your assumptions about who I am and what I represent. Mitchell's face flushed red, but he didn't respond. Lisa continued, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent years investigating similar incidents. What's particularly troubling is that you seemed more concerned with proving that you were right than with determining whether you were actually right. That's not police work. That's ego, and it has no place in law enforcement. Chief Williams stepped in before Mitchell could respond. Agent Chen, Officer Mitchell will be suspended pending a full investigation. I want to assure you that this incident will be thoroughly reviewed and appropriate action will be taken. Chief, suspension isn't enough, Lisa replied firmly. This officer violated my constitutional rights under color of law, which is a federal felony. The fact that he's wearing a badge doesn't give him immunity from the consequences of his actions. The crowd of witnesses had been listening to every word of the conversation, and several people began nodding in agreement with Lisa's statements. The incident had clearly struck a nerve with community members who had their own experiences or concerns about police conduct. David's voice came through the phone again. "Chief Williams, I want to be clear about something. This isn't going to be handled as an internal disciplinary matter. We're opening a federal civil rights investigation, and we'll be seeking criminal charges if the evidence supports them." The announcement of a federal investigation sent a visible chill through the gathered officers. They all understood that federal civil rights charges carried serious penalties, including prison time and EFI. 3 months after the incident on Maple Avenue, the consequences of Officer Mitchell's actions had rippled far beyond what anyone could have imagined on that quiet Tuesday afternoon. The federal investigation that Lisa and David had promised was now in full swing, and its findings had shocked even experienced civil rights investigators. Lisa sat in the FBI's Washington, D.C. field office, reviewing a thick file that contained evidence gathered from the investigation into not just her arrest, but into a pattern of behavior by Officer Mitchell that stretched back over several years. What had started as a single incident of misconduct had uncovered a troubling history of problematic police work that the Millbrook Police Department had either ignored or inadequately addressed. David entered their shared office, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing the expression of someone who had just received significant news. "The U.S. Attorney's Office just called," he announced. "They're moving forward with federal charges against Mitchell." Lisa looked up from the file she was reviewing. "What are the charges?" "Deprivation of rights under color of law, false imprisonment, and violation of your 4th and 14th Amendment rights. If convicted on all counts, he's looking at up to 10 years in federal prison." The weight of those words settled over both agents. While they had expected serious charges, the reality of a fellow law enforcement officer facing a decade in prison for his actions was sobering, even for someone who had violated Lisa's rights as egregiously as Mitchell had. "What about the other cases?" Lisa asked, referring to the additional complaints against Mitchell that the investigation had uncovered. David sat down at his desk and opened his own copy of the case file. "That's where it gets really interesting. The investigation found 17 separate complaints against Mitchell over the past 5 years. 15 of those complaints were from minorities who claimed they were stopped, harassed, or arrested without justification. The pattern is undeniable." Lisa shook her head in frustration. 17 complaints and the department never saw a pattern? Never thought to investigate whether their officer might have a problem with racial bias? "It gets worse," David continued. Chief Williams admitted during his deposition that several complaints had been filed, but the department classified most of them as unfounded without conducting thorough investigations. They basically took Mitchell's word over the complainants in almost every case. The revelation that Mitchell had a long history of similar behavior made Lisa's experience even more troubling. Her arrest hadn't been an aberration or a momentary lapse in judgment. It had been part of a systematic pattern of targeting people based on race and perceived social status. "What about the video evidence from that day?" Lisa asked. David pulled out his phone and showed Lisa a news article. The witness videos went viral within hours of being posted. The story was picked up by national news outlets, and it's been viewed millions of times. The public reaction has been intense. Lisa scrolled through the article, which detailed not just her arrest but the investigation that had followed. The headline read, "FBI Agents Arrest Exposes Pattern of Police Misconduct in Small-Town Department." Below that was a photo of Lisa in handcuffs, surrounded by police officers, with a crowd of witnesses watching the scene unfold. "How has the Millbrook Police Department responded?" Lisa asked. "Chief Williams resigned 2 weeks ago," David replied. "The mayor announced a complete review of the department's policies and procedures, and they've brought in an outside consultant to restructure their training programs. 3 other officers, including Mitchell's immediate supervisor, have been placed on administrative leave pending investigation." Lisa felt a mixture of satisfaction and sadness at the news. She was glad that meaningful changes were being made, but she also knew that the damage to community trust would take years to repair. The incident on Maple Avenue had exposed problems that had been festering for years, harming countless members of the community who didn't have federal credentials to protect them. What about Officer Rodriguez and Officer Williams? Lisa asked, referring to the two officers who had suggested running her name through the federal database. Both have been commended for their professionalism and have been promoted. Rodriguez is now a sergeant, and Williams is being considered for detective training. The new acting chief wants to make it clear that officers who do the right thing will be rewarded. Lisa appreciated hearing that the officers who had tried to de-escalate the situation were being recognized. Too often, good officers stayed silent when their colleagues acted inappropriately, but Rodriguez and Williams had shown moral courage by speaking up. Lisa, David said, his tone becoming more serious. There's something else you need to know. The Department of Justice is considering opening a broader investigation into the entire Millbrook Police Department under the pattern and practice provisions of federal civil rights law. Lisa understood the significance of what David was telling her. A pattern and practice investigation was the federal government's most powerful tool for reforming police departments that showed systematic violations of civil rights. It could result in court-ordered reforms, federal oversight, and fundamental changes to how the department operated. That would be unprecedented for a department that size, Lisa observed. It would be, David agreed. But the evidence suggests that Mitchell's behavior wasn't an isolated problem. The culture of the department allowed this kind of conduct to continue for years without meaningful intervention. Lisa thought about Mrs. Patterson and the other neighbors who had witnessed her arrest. She wondered how many other people in Millbrook had experienced similar treatment from Mitchell, but had never reported it because they assumed no one would believe them or take action. David, I want to do something, Lisa said, reaching for her phone. I want to call Mrs. Patterson and thank her personally for what she did that day. David nodded approvingly. That's a good idea. She showed real courage by speaking up. Lisa dialed the number she had gotten from Mrs. Patterson after the incident. The elderly woman answered on the second ring, her voice immediately brightening when she recognized Lisa's voice. Lisa, how wonderful to hear from you. How are you doing, dear? I'm doing well, Mrs. Patterson. I wanted to call and thank you again for what you did that day. Your willingness to speak up made a real difference. Mrs. Patterson's voice became more serious. Lisa, what happened to you that day was wrong, and I couldn't just stand by and watch it happen. But I have to tell you, I'm not surprised it happened. What do you mean? Lisa asked. Officer Mitchell had a reputation in the neighborhood, Mrs. Patterson explained. Several of my friends had negative experiences with him over the years. He seemed to have a particular problem with anyone he didn't think belonged in our community, Lisa felt her anger rising again as she heard confirmation of what the investigation had revealed. Why didn't anyone file complaints? Some people did, Mrs. Patterson replied. But nothing ever seemed to come of it. Most people just learned to avoid him if they could. Lisa realized that Mrs. Patterson was describing exactly the kind of environment that allowed officers like Mitchell to continue their problematic behavior. When communities lost faith in the complaint process, bad officers could operate with impunity. Well, Mrs. Patterson, I want you to know that things are changing. Officer Mitchell has been arrested on federal charges and the entire department is being restructured. I heard about that on the news, Mrs. Patterson said. I'm glad something is finally being done. What happened to you shouldn't happen to anyone. After finishing her conversation with Mrs. Patterson, Lisa turned her attention back to the case file. She was reviewing the timeline of Mitchell's career when her phone rang again. This time, it was an unknown number with a Millbrook area code. Agent Chen, this is Acting Chief Thompson with the Millbrook Police Department. I hope you don't mind me calling directly. Lisa recognized the name. Thompson was the interim chief who had been brought in to clean up the department after Chief Williams' resignation. Not at all, Chief Thompson. What can I do for you? Agent Chen, I wanted to personally apologize for what happened to you in our community. And I wanted to ask if you would consider coming to speak to our officers about civil rights and proper police procedure. Lisa was surprised by the request. You want me to train the officers who work in the same department as the man who arrested me? Agent Chen, that's exactly why I want you to train them. They need to hear from someone who experienced firsthand what happens when police work is done wrong. They need to understand that their actions have real consequences for real people. Lisa considered the offer. On one hand, returning to Millbrook would be emotionally difficult. On the other hand, it might be an opportunity to help prevent other people from experiencing what she had gone through. Chief Thompson, I'll consider your request, but I have some conditions. Of course. What would they be? First, I want a guarantee that any officer who attends the training will face no retaliation for asking difficult questions or expressing concerns about department culture. Second, I want the training to be open to community members as well, so they can hear the same message about professional policing that your officers hear.